Hi, Paul. How are you? Doing a sound test here. I hope I get this done right. Maybe you can help me with this. Would somebody actually, I'm actually going to be reading tonight. Okay, so I need some help. I don't know if you caught what I'm doing tonight. Oh gosh, already, eh? Okay, so as you know, those that are coming in for that reason, I'm doing a reading, starting to read. I had a few people ask if I would just read once a week. So I am willing to give it a shot to see how it goes. Now, I just need to do the test on the microphone because maybe my voice projects enough with the phone microphone versus one of these. So I just need to get rid of this. Hang on. Yeah, I can just imagine what's going to happen in here without a moderator. I haven't been on Thursday nights. Hang on a sec. Okay, just give me a minute, Paul, and because I don't want... No, that's not going to work, is it? No, this isn't working. Hang on. Okay, there we go. I want to see if any of my friends that actually know how to moderate are in here too, because if I'm reading, I can't be reading comments. So, okay. So you can hear me fine right now, Paul, right? Now, I'm going to plug in this microphone. There we go. Well, this could be a complete bust, but you know what? I'm willing to try. See what happens. If reading to people makes them happy, then I am game to do it. So, here we go. Okay, does this make an improvement in the sound for you? I still have 5 minutes. Whoops. Hey, Toolman. Hi. How you liking those lollipops? The book that I'm going to be reading, I don't know if you're familiar with it or not. It's I actually decided just to start is that I'll go with some of my favorites. I didn't want to go with too long of reads, just so I can see if this is something that for sure that followers would enjoy having, because I know I have a lot of truck drivers, people coming and going from work, and maybe that's why I was asked to do this. So anyway, it's Tuesdays with Morrie. So it's a nice book. It's a good read. Sounds the same. Well, then you know what? That just tells me that the iPhone 12 Pro is great with sound then. Okay. But I come through clear. Here, let me just try something. Not that I want to read like this. Does this make a difference if I'm speaking into the microphone directly? Hi, Mark. Hey, Mark, you want to be a moderator? I have to admit, I am a little nervous about doing this, so just bear with me. But you know what? If I don't try, I'll never know. The sound's the same. And Mark, would you mind being a moderator? You'll do it? Okay, I'm just going to switch you over, okay? Thank you so much. Okay, I got to remember how to do this. 3 dots. Admin settings. Moderators. Okay, no, that's not it. Just give me a sec. I'll get into it. Remove, confirm. Okay, and then Mark. Oh, awesome. Thank you so much, Paul. Well, thank you for stopping in. And if you're around tomorrow night and you guys are looking for something to listen to, We're doing the 80s, 90s requests tomorrow night starting at 8:30, so you guys can join in if you like. Okay, Mark, I'm just working on this to get you in. And then I don't know why this is acting goofy tonight. Hang on. Manage. Add moderator. Boom! You're it. Thank you. I appreciate. Whoop. There we go. And then just fix the lighting a bit. I'll be glad when my proper, now it's just like, okay, there we go. That's better. I'll be glad when my lighting gets fixed. I'm 50. Okay. Take me on vacay too. Yeah, let's all just go. Pick us up like house to house, right? I have one more minute. That's so funny. Yes, you're in moderation. Thank you for doing that. Well, you know what to do. So I haven't done a Thursday night, so, and this is my first time, and if I'm reading, I can't be looking at comments. So yeah, it's a reading session, so we'll see how everything goes. And if people jump in and ask like what's going on, just let them know it's just a reading hour. I did put it in the title as well. Thank you. I appreciate it. It's good to have friends that can help. And then we see each other again tomorrow night too. No, it's really appreciated. Thank you so much. Yeah, I got rid of my 2 wingback chairs. That'd look cool now if I had my wingbacks. So now I don't know if I'm too far, too close. As long as you can hear me. All right. Okay, so it's 8 o'clock. This is so weird. I've written, read at schools for the children. So to be able to read for adults, I hope for those that had asked, I did DM them to let them know that I'd be reading. So hopefully they tune in and I'll get some feedback of what they thought about it. And, maybe this will become a weekly thing if you really enjoy it. So I'll try to stick with, like I said, not as long books. And I don't know, just different books. DM me the type of books that you'd like to hear read. Did you guess the commercial I went way back with? No, I didn't. And I'm wondering too, like some commercials are going, and I wish people would actually, I know people are leaving the hints, the words from a song, but then no one's going to answer anybody else's. So it's kind of like if I can get people doing that without Googling, because I'm trying to remember some of them. Toolman had a couple of good ones too. Okay, my friends. It's from 1948. Whoa, you really get in there with your history when it comes to music. No, it's commercials. I admire that. Okay, so here we go. Now I'll begin. So I'm going to start and we'll leave the fun for tomorrow night. We can talk more about the commercials tomorrow. And then after I'm done reading, I guess we can have a conversation too with everybody. So again, I'm reading from Tuesdays with Morrie. So I'm just starting to read this. So you're coming in at a great time. I'll only read an hour and then I'd love to hear feedback of how you enjoyed it. I just put up a video actually regarding tonight. So I'm hoping that it's positive. If it's something that you're just not interested in, that's fine. It's, we'll see how it goes. Okay, so let me just get comfy here. Okay, so story time. All right, are we ready? And you can hear me perfectly fine from back here? Okay, so Tuesdays with Morrie, an old man, a young man, and life's greatest lesson. The curriculum. The last class of my old professor's life took place once a week in his house, by a window, in the study, where he could watch a small hibiscus plant shed its pink leaves. The class met on Tuesdays. It began after breakfast. The subject was the meaning of life. It was taught from experience. No grades were given, but there were oral exams each week. You were expected to respond to questions, and you were expected to pose questions of your own. You were also required to perform physical tasks now and then, such as lifting the professor's head to a comfortable spot on the pillow or placing his glasses on the bridge of his nose. Kissing him goodbye earned you extra credit. No books were required, yet many topics were covered, including love, work, community, family, aging, forgiveness, and finally, death. The last lecture brief was only a few words. A funeral was held in lieu of graduation. Although no final exam was given, you were expected to produce one long paper on what was learned. That paper is presented here. The last class of my old professor's life had only one student. I was the student. It is the late spring of 1979, a hot, sticky Saturday afternoon. Hundreds of us sit together side by side in rows of wooden folded chairs on the main campus lawn. We wear blue nylon robes. We listen impatiently to long speeches. When the ceremony is over, we throw our caps in the air and we are officially graduated from college, the senior class of Brandeis University in the city of Waltham, Massachusetts. For many of us, the curtain had just come down on childhood. Afterward, I find Morrie Schwartz, my favorite professor, and introduce him to my parents. He is a small man who takes small steps, and if a strong wind could, at any time, whisk him up into the clouds. In his graduation day robe, he looked like a cross between a biblical prophet and a Christmas elf. He has sparkling blue-green eyes, thinning silver hair that spills onto his forehead, big ears, a triangular nose, and tufts of graying eyebrows. Although his teeth are crooked and his lower ones are slanted back, as if someone had punched them in, when he smiles as if you just told him the first joke on earth. He tells my parents how I took every class he taught. He tells them, "You have a special boy here." Embarrassed, I look at my feet. Before we leave, I hand my professor a present, a tan briefcase with his initials on the front. I bought this the day before at the shopping mall. I didn't want to forget him. Maybe I didn't want him to forget me. "Mitch, you are one of the good ones," he says, admiring the briefcase. Then he hugs me. I feel his thin arms around my back. I am taller than he is, and when he holds me, I feel awkward, older, as if I were the parent and he were the child. He asks if I will stay in touch, and without hesitation, I say, "Of course." When he steps back, I see that he is crying. The syllabus. His death sentence came in the summer of 1994. Looking back, Morrie knew something bad was coming long before that. He knew it the day he gave up dancing. He had always been a dancer, my old professor. The music didn't matter. Rock and roll, big band, the blues, he loved them all. He would close his eyes and with a blissful smile begin to move to his own sense of rhythm. It wasn't always pretty, but then he didn't worry about a partner. Morrie danced by himself. He used to go to this church in Harvard Square every Wednesday night for something called Dance Free. They had flashing lights and booming speakers, and Morrie would wander in and among the mostly student crowd, wearing a white t-shirt and black sweatpants and a towel around his neck, and whatever music was playing, that's the music to which he danced. He'd do the Lindy to the Jimi Hendrix. He twisted and twirled. He waved his arms like a conductor on amphetamines until sweat was dripping down the middle of his back. No one there knew he was a prominent doctor of sociology with years of experience as a college professor and several well-respected books. They just thought he was some old nut. Once he brought a tango tape and got them to play it over the speakers. Then he commandeered the floor, shooting back and forth like some hot Latin lover. When he finished, everyone applauded. He could have stayed in that moment forever. But then the dancing stopped. He developed asthma in his 60s. His breathing became labored. One day he was walking along the Charles River and a cold burst of wind left him choking for air. He rushed to the hospital, injected with adrenaline. A few years later, he began to have trouble walking. At a birthday party for a friend, he stumbled inexplicably. Another night, he fell down the steps of a theater, startling a small crowd of people. "Give him air," someone yelled. He was in his 70s by this point, so they whispered old age and helped him to his feet. But Morrie, who was always more in touch with his insides than the rest of us, knew something else was wrong. This was more than old age. He was wary all the time. He had trouble sleeping. He dreamt he was dying. he began to see doctors, lots of them. They tested his blood, they tested his urine, they put a scope up his rear end and looked inside his intestines. Finally, when nothing could be found, one doctor ordered a muscle biopsy, taking a small piece out of Morrie's calf. The lab report came back suggesting a neurological problem, and Morrie was brought in for yet another series of tests. In one of those tests, he sat in a special seat as they zapped him with electrical current, an electrical chair of sorts, and studied his neurological responses. "We need to check this further," the doctor said, looking over his results. "Why?" Morrie asked. "What is it?" "We're not sure. Your times are slow." His times were slow? What did that mean? Finally, on a hot, humid day in August 1994, Morrie and his wife Charlotte went to the neurologist's office, and he asked them to sit before he broke the news. Morrie had amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, known as ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, a brutal, unforgiving illness of the neurological system. There was no cure. "How did I get it?" Morrie asked. "Nobody knew." "Is it terminal?" "Yes." "So I'm going to die?" "Yes, you are," the doctor said, "and I'm very sorry." He sat with Morrie and Charlotte for nearly 2 hours, patiently answering their questions. When they left, the doctor gave them some information on ALS, little pamphlets as if they were opening a bank account. Outside, the sun was shining, and people were going about their business. A woman ran to put money in the parking meter. Another carried groceries. Charlotte had a million thoughts running through her mind. How much time do we have left? How will we manage? How will we pay the bills? My old professor, meanwhile, was stunned by the normalcy of the day around him. Shouldn't the world stop? Don't they know what has happened to me? But the world did not stop. It took no notice at all, and as Morrie pulled weakly on the car door, he felt as if he were dropping into a hole. Now what? He thought. As my older professor searched for answers, the disease took him over, day by day, week by week. He backed the car out of the garage one morning and could barely push the brakes. That was the end of his driving. He kept tripping, so he purchased a cane. That was the end of his walking free. We went for his regular swim at the YMCA, but he found he could no longer undress himself. So he hired his first home care worker, a theology student named Tony, who helped him in and out of the pool and in and out of his bathing suit. In the locker room, the other swimmers pretended not to stare. They stared anyhow. That was the end of his privacy. In the fall of 1994, Morrie came to the Hilly Brandeers campus to teach his final college course. He could have skipped this, of course. The university would have understood. Why suffer in front of so many people? Stay at home, get your affairs in order. But the idea of quitting did not occur to Morrie. Instead, he hobbled into the classroom, his home for more than 30 years. Because of the cane, he took a while to reach the chair. Finally, he sat down, dropped his glasses off his nose, and looked out at the young faces who stared back in silence. "My friends, I assume you are all here for the social psychology class. I have been teaching this course for 20 years, and in this first time I can say there is a risk in taking it because I have a fatal illness. I may not live to finish the semester. If you feel this is a problem, I understand if you wish to drop the course." He smiled. And that was the end of his secret. ALS is like a lit candle. It melts your nerves and it leaves your body a pile of wax. Often, it begins with the legs and works its way up. You lose control of your thigh muscles so that you cannot support yourself standing. You lose control of your trunk muscles so that you cannot sit up straight. By the end of it, you are still alive. You are breathing, though, through a tube in a hole in your throat, while your soul, perfectly awake, is imprisoned inside in a limp husk, perhaps able to blink or cluck a tongue. Like something from a science fiction movie, the man frozen inside his own flesh. This takes no more than 5 years from the day you contract the disease. Morrie's doctors guessed he had maybe 2 years left. Morrie knew it was less. But my old professor made a profound decision. He began to construct the day he came out of the doctor's office with a sword hanging over his head. "Do I wither up and disappear, or do I make the best of my time that I have left?" he asked himself. He would not wither. He would not be ashamed of dying. Instead, he would make death his final project, the center point of his days. Since everyone was going to die, he could be of great value, right? He could be research, a human textbook. Study in my slow and patient demise. Watch what happens to me. Learn with me. Morrie would walk that final bridge between life and death and narrate the trip. The fall semester passed quickly. The pills increased. Therapy became a regular routine. Nurses came to his house to work with Morrie's withering legs to keep the muscles active, bending them back and forth as if pumping water from a well. Massage specialists came by once a week to try to soothe the constant heavy stiffness he felt. He met with medication teachers and closed his eyes and narrowed his thoughts until his world shrunk down to a single breath, in and out, in and out. One day, using his cane, he stepped onto the curb and fell over into the street. The cane was exchanged for a walker. As his body weakened, the back and forth to the bathroom became too exhausting, so Morrie began to urinate into a large beaker. He had to support himself as he did this, meaning someone had to hold the beaker while Morrie filled it. Most of us would be embarrassed by all this, especially at Morrie's age. But Morrie was not like most of us. When some of his colleagues would sit and visit, he would say to them, "Listen, I have to pee. Would you mind helping? Are you okay with that?" Often, to their own surprise, they were. In fact, he entertained a growing stream of visitors. He had discussion groups about dying, what it really meant, how societies had always been afraid of it without necessarily understanding it. He told his friends that if they really wanted to help him, they would treat him not with sympathy, but with visits, phone calls, a sharing of their problems, the way they had shared their problems, because Morrie had always been a wonderful listener. For all that was happening to him, his voice was strong and inviting, and his mind was vibrating with a million thoughts. He was intent on proving that the word dying was not synonymous with useless. The new year came and went. Although he never said it to anyone, Morrie knew this would be the last year of his life. He was using a wheelchair now, and he was fighting time to say all the things he wanted to say to all the people he loved. When a colleague of Brady's died suddenly of a heart attack, Morrie went to his funeral. He came home depressed. "What a waste," he said. "All those people saying all those wonderful things, and Irv never even got to hear any of it." Morrie had a better idea. He made some calls. He chose a date, and on a cold Sunday afternoon, he was joined in his home by a small group of friends and family for a living funeral. Each of them spoke and paid tribute to my old professor. Some cried, some laughed. One woman read a poem. "My dear and loving cousin, your ageless heart, as you move through time, layer on layer, tender sequoia." Morrie cried and laughed with them, and all the heartfelt things we never get to say to those we love, Morrie said that day. His living funeral was a rousing success. Only Morrie wasn't dead yet. In fact, the most unusual part of his life was about to unfold. The student. At this point, I should explain what happened to me since that summer day when I last hugged my dear wise professor and promised to keep in touch. I did not keep in touch. In fact, I lost contact with most of the people I knew in college, including my beer-drinking friends and the first woman I ever woke up with in the morning. The years after graduation hardened me into someone quite different from the strutting graduate who left campus that day, headed for New York City, ready to offer the world his talent. The world, I discovered, was not all that interested. I wandered around my early 20s, paying rent and reading classifieds, and wondering why the lights were not turning green for me. My dream was to be a famous musician. I played the piano. But after several years of dark, empty nightclubs, broken promises, bands that kept breaking up, and producers who seemed excited about everyone but me, the dream soured. I was failing for the first time in my life. At the same time, I had my first serious encounter with death. My favorite uncle, my mother's brother, the man who had taught me music, taught me to drive, teased me about girls, thrown me a football, that one adult whom I targeted as a child and said, "That's who I want to be when I grow up," died of pancreatic cancer at the age of 44. He was a short, handsome man with a thick mustache, and I was with him for the last year of his life, living in an apartment just below his. I watched his strong body wither, then bloat, saw him suffer night after night, doubled over at the dinner table, pressing on his stomach, his eyes shut, his mouth contorted in pain. "Ah, God," he'd moan. "Ah, Jesus." The rest of us, my aunt, his 2 young sons, me, stood there silently, cleaning the plates, averting our eyes. It was the most helpless I have ever felt in my life. One night in May, my uncle and I sat on the balcony of his apartment. It was breezy and warm. He looked out toward the horizon and said, through gritted teeth, that he wouldn't be around to see his kids into the next school year. He asked if I would look after them. I told him not to talk that way. He stared at me sadly. He died a few weeks later. After the funeral, my life changed. I felt as if time were suddenly precious, water going down an open drain, and I could not move quickly enough. No more playing music at half-empty nightclubs. No more writing songs in my apartment, songs that no one would hear. I returned to school. I earned a master's degree in journalism and took the first job offered as a sports writer. Instead of chasing my own fame, I wrote about famous athletes chasing theirs. I worked for newspapers and freelance for magazines. I worked at a pace that knew no hours, no limits. I would wake up in the morning, brush my teeth, and sit down to the typewriter in the same clothes I had slept in. My uncle had worked for a corporation and hated it. Same thing every day, and I was determined never to end up like him. I bounced around from New York to Florida and eventually took a job in Detroit as a columnist for the Detroit Free Press. The sports appetite in that city was insatiable. They had professional teams in football, basketball, baseball, and hockey, and it matched my ambition. In a few years, I was not only penning columns, I was writing sports books, doing radio shows, and appearing regularly on TV, spouting my opinions on rich football players and hypocritical college sports programs. I was part of the media thunderstorm that now soaks our country. I was in demand. I stopped renting, I started buying. I bought a house on a hill, I bought cars, I invested in stocks and built a portfolio. I was cranked to a fifth gear in everything I did on a deadline. I exercised like a demon, I drove my car at breakneck speed, I made more money than I had ever figured to see. I met a dark-haired woman named Janine who somehow loved me despite my schedule and constant absences. We married after a 7-year courtship. I was back to work a week after the wedding. I told her and myself that we would one day start a family, something she wanted very much, but that day never came. Instead, I buried myself in accomplishments because with accomplishments, I believed I could control things. I could squeeze in every last piece of happiness before I got sick and died, like my uncle before me, which I figured was my natural fate. As for Morrie, well, I thought about him now and then, the things that he had taught me about being human and relating to others, but it was always in the distance, as if from another life. Over the years, I threw away any mail that came from Brandeis University, figuring they were only asking for money. So I did not know of Morrie's illness. The people who might have told me were long forgotten, their phone numbers buried in some packed away box in the attic. It might have stayed that way had I not been flicking through the TV channels late one night when something caught my ear. The audio-visual. In March of 1995, a limousine carrying Ted Koppel, the host of ABC TV's Nightline, pulled up to the snow-covered curb outside Morrie's house in West Newton, Massachusetts. Morrie was in a wheelchair full-time now, getting used to helpers lifting him like a heavy sack from the chair to the bed and from the bed to the chair. He had begun to cough while eating, and chewing was a chore. His legs were dead. He would never walk again. Yet, he refused to be depressed. Instead, Morrie had become a lightning rod of ideas. He jotted down his thoughts on yellow pads, envelopes, folders, scrap paper. He wrote bite-sized philosophies about living with death's shadow. Accept what you are able to do and do what you are not able to do. Accept the past as past without denying it or discarding it. Learn to forgive yourself and to forgive others. Don't assume that it's too late to get involved. After a while, he had more than 50 of these, which he shared with his friends. One friend, a fellow professor named Morrie Stein, was so taken by the words that he sent them to Boston Globe reporter, who came out and wrote a long feature story on Morrie. The headline read, "A Professor's Final Course, His Own Death." The article caught the eye of a producer from the Nightline show who brought it to Koppel in Washington, D.C. "Take a look at this," the producer said. Next thing you knew, there were cameramen in Morrie's living room and Koppel's limousine in front of the house. Several Morrie's friends and family members had gathered to meet Koppel. When the famous man entered the house, they buzzed with excitement, all except Morrie, who wheeled himself forward, raised his eyebrows, and interrupted the clamor with his high sing-song voice. "Ted, I need to check you out before I agree to do this interview." There was an awkward moment of silence, then the two men were ushered into the study. The door was shut. "Man," one friend whispered out the door, "I hope Ted goes easy on Morrie." "I hope Morrie goes easy on Ted," said the other. Inside the office, Morrie motioned for Koppel to sit down. He crossed his hands in his lap and smiled. "Tell me something close to your heart," Morrie began. "My heart?" Koppel studied the old man. "All right," he said cautiously. He spoke about his children. "They were close to his heart, weren't they?" "Good," Morrie said. "Now tell me something about your faith." Koppel was uncomfortable. "I don't usually talk about such things with people I've only known for a few minutes." "Ted, I'm dying," Morrie said, peering over his glasses. "I don't have a lot of time here." Koppel laughed. "All right, faith." He quoted a passage from Marcus Aurelius, something he felt strongly about. Morrie nodded. "Now, let me ask you something," Koppel said. "Have you ever seen my program?" Morrie shrugged. "Twice, I think." "Twice, that's all?" "Don't feel bad. I've only seen Oprah once." "Well, the 2 times you saw my show, what did you think?" Morrie paused. "To be honest, yes. I thought you were a narcissist." Koppel burst into laughter. He said, "I'm too ugly to be a narcissist." Soon the cameras were rolling in front of the living room fireplace with Koppel in his crisp blue suit and Morrie in his shaggy gray sweater. He had refused fantasy clothes or makeup for this interview. His philosophy was that death should not be embarrassing. He was not about to powder his nose. Because Morrie sat in the wheelchair, the camera never caught his withered legs, and because he was still able to move his hands, Morrie always spoke with both hands waving. He showed great passion when explaining how you face the end of life. "Ted," he said, "when all this started, I asked myself, am I going to withdraw from the world like most people do, or am I going to live? I decided I'm going to live, or at least try to live, the way I want, with dignity, with courage, with humor, with composure. There are some mornings when I cry and mourn for myself. Some mornings I'm so angry and bitter, but it doesn't last too long. Then I get up and say, I want to live." So far, I've been able to do it. Will I be able to continue? I don't know, but I'm betting on myself that I will. Koppel seemed extremely taken with Morrie. He asked about the humility that death induced. "Well, Fred," Morrie said accidentally. Then he quickly corrected himself. "I mean Ted." "Now that's inducing humility," Koppel said, laughing. The two men spoke about the afterlife. They spoke about Morrie's increasing dependency on other people. He already needed help eating and sitting and moving from place to place. What Koppel asked, did Morrie dread the most about his slow, insidious decay? Morrie paused. He asked if he could say certain thing on television. Koppel said, "Go ahead." Morrie looked straight into the eyes of the most famous interviewer in America. "Well, Ted, one day soon, someone's gonna have to wipe my ass." The program aired on a Friday night. It began with Ted Koppel from behind the desk in Washington, his voice booming with authority. "Who is Morrie Schwartz?" he said. "And why, by the end of the night, are so many of you going to care about him?" 1,000 miles away in my house on the hill, I was casually flipping channels. I heard these words from the TV set, "Who is Morrie Schwartz?" and went numb. It is our first class together in the spring of 1976. I enter Morrie's large office and notice the seemingly countless books that line the wall, shelf after shelf. Books on sociology, physiology, philosophy, religion, psychology. There is a large rug on the hardwood floor and a window that looks out on the campus walk. Only a dozen or so students are there, fumbling with notebooks and the syllabi. Most of them wear jeans and earth shoes and plaid flannel shirts. I tell myself it will not be easy to cut a class this small. Maybe I shouldn't take it. "Mitchell?" Morrie says, reading from the attendance list. I raise a hand. "Do you prefer Mitch, or is Mitchell better?" I've never been asked this by a teacher. I do a double take at this guy in his yellow turtleneck and green corduroy pants, the silver hair that falls on his forehead. He's smiling. "Mitch," I say. "Mitch is what my friends call me." "Well, Mitch it is then," Morrie says, as if closing a deal. "And Mitch, yes, I hope that one day you will think of me as your friend." The orientation. As I turned the rental car onto Morrie Street in West Newton, a quiet suburb of Boston, I had a cup of coffee in one hand and a cellular phone between my ear and shoulder. I was talking to a TV producer about a piece we were doing. My eyes jumped from the digital clock, my return flight was in a few hours, to the mailbox numbers on the 3-line suburban street. The car radio was on, all news stations. This was how I operated 5 things at once. Roll back the tape, I said to the producer. Let me hear that part again. Okay, he said, it's going to take a second. Suddenly, I was upon the house. I pushed the brakes, spilling my coffee in my lap. As the car stopped, I caught a glimpse of a large Japanese maple tree and 3 figures sitting near it in the driveway, a young man and a middle-aged woman flanking a small old man in a wheelchair. Morrie! At the sight of my old professor, I froze. Hello, the producer said in my ear. Did I lose you? I had not seen him in 16 years. His hair was thinner, nearly white. His face was gaunt. I suddenly felt unprepared for this reunion, for one thing. I was stuck on the phone, and I hoped that he hadn't noticed my arrival so that I could drive around the block a few more times, finish my business, get mentally ready. But Morrie, this new withered version of a man I had once known so well, was smiling at the car, hands folded in his lap, waiting for me to emerge. Hey, the producer said again. Are you there? For all the time we'd spent together, for all the kindness and patience Morrie had shown me when I was young, I should have dropped the phone and jumped from the car, run and held him and kissed him hello. Instead, I killed the engine and sunk off into the seat as if I were looking for something. Yeah, I'm here, I whispered, and continued my conversation with the TV producer until we were finished. I did what I had become best at doing. I tended to my work even while my dying professor waited on his front lawn. I am not proud of this, but that is what I did. Now, 5 minutes later, Morrie was hugging me, his thinning hair rubbing against my neck. I had told him I was searching for my keys. That's what had taken me so long in the car, and squeezed him tighter as if I could crush my little lie. Although the spring sunshine was warm, he wore a windbreaker and his legs were covered by a blanket. He smelled faintly sour, the way people on medication sometimes do. With his face pressed close to mine, I could hear his labored breathing in my ear. My old friend, he whispered, you've come at last. He rocked against me, not letting go, his hands reaching up for my elbows as I bent over him. I was surprised at such affection after all these years, but then in the stone walls I had built between my present and my past, I had forgotten how close we once were. I remembered graduation day, the briefcase's tears at my departure, and I swallowed because I knew deep down that I was no longer the good gift-bearing student he remembered. I only hoped that for the next few hours I could fool him. Inside the house, we sat at a walnut dining room table near a window that looked out on the neighbor's house. Morrie fussed with his wheelchair, trying to get comfortable. As was his custom, he wanted to feed me, and I said all right. One of the helpers, a stout Italian woman named Connie, cut up the bread and tomatoes and brought containers of chicken salad, hummus, and tabbouleh. She also brought some pills. Morrie looked at them and sighed. His eyes were more sunken than I remembered them, and his cheekbones were more pronounced. This gave him a harsher, older look, until he smiled, of course. Then the sagging cheeks gathered up like curtains. Mitch, he said softly, you know that I'm dying. I know. All right, then. Morrie swallowed the pills, put down the paper cup, inhaled deeply, and then let it out. Shall I tell you what it's like? What it's like to die? Yes. Although I was unaware of it, our last class had just begun. It is my freshman year. Morrie is older than most of the teachers, and I am younger than most of the students, having left high school a year early. To compensate for my youth on campus, I wear old gray sweatshirts and box in a local gym and walk around with an unlit cigarette in my mouth, even though I do not smoke. I drive a beat-up Mercury Cougar with the windows down and the music up. I seek my identity in toughness, but it is Morrie's softness that draws me, and because he does not look at me as a kid trying to be something more than I am, I relax. I finish that first course with him and enroll for another. He is an easy marker. He does not much care for grades. One year, they say during the Vietnam War, Morrie gave all his male students A's to help them to keep their students' deferments. I begin to call Morrie Coach, the way I used to address my high school track coach. Morrie likes the nickname. Coach, he says. All right, I'll be your coach, and you can be my player. You can play all the lovely parts of life I'm too old for now. Sometimes we eat together in the cafeteria. Morrie, to my delight, is even more of a slob than I am. He talks instead of chewing, laughs with his mouth open, delivers a passionate thought through a mouthful of egg salad, the little yellow pieces spewing from his teeth. It cracks me up. The whole time I know him, I have two overwhelming desires: to hug him and to give him a napkin. The classroom. The sun beamed in through the dining room window, lighting up the hardwood floor. We had been talking there for nearly 2 hours. The phone rang yet again, and Morrie asked his helper, Connie, to get it. She had been jotting the callers' names in Morrie's small black appointment book. Friends, meditation teachers, a discussion group, someone who wanted to photograph him for a magazine. It was clear I was not the only one invested in visiting my old professor. The Nightline appearance had made him something of a celebrity, but I was impressed with, perhaps even a bit of envious of all the friends that Morrie seemed to have. I thought about the buddies that circled my orbit back in college. Where had they gone? You know, Mitch, now that I'm dying, I've become much more interesting to people. You were always interesting. Oh, Morrie smiled, you're kind. No, I'm not, I thought. Here's the thing, he said. People see me as a bridge. I'm not as alive as I used to be, but I'm not yet dead. I'm sort of in between. He coughed and regained his smile. I'm on the last great journey here, and people want me to tell them what to pack. The phone rang again. Morrie, can you talk? Connie asked. I'm visiting with my old pal now, he announced. Let them call back. I cannot tell you why he received me so warmly. I was hardly a promising student who had left him 16 years earlier. Had it not been for Nightline, Morrie may have died without ever seeing me again. I had no good excuses for this, except the one that everyone these days seems to have. I'd become too wrapped up in the siren song of my own life. I was busy. What happened to me? I asked myself. Morrie's high, smoky voice took me back to my university years when I thought rich people were evil, a shirt and a tie were prison clothes, and life without freedom to get up and go, motorcycle beneath you, breeze in your face, down the streets of Paris into the mountains of Tibet was not a good life at all. What happened to me? The 80s happened. The 90s happened. Death and sickness and getting fat and going bald happened. I traded lots of dreams for a bigger paycheck, and I never even realized I was doing it. Yet, here was Morrie talking with the wonder of our college years, as if I'd simply been on a long vacation. Have you found someone to share your heart with? He asked. Are you giving to your community? Are you at peace with yourself? Are you trying to be as human as you can be? I squirmed, wanting to show I had been grappling deeply with such questions. What happened to me? I once promised myself I'd never work for money, that I would join the Peace Corps, that I would live in beautiful, inspirational places. Instead, I had been in Detroit for 10 years now at the same workplace, using the same bank, visiting the same barber. I was 37, more efficient than in college, tied to computers and modems and cell phones. I wrote articles about rich athletes who, for the most part, could not care less about people like me. I was no longer young for my peer group, nor did I walk around in gray sweatshirts with unlit cigarettes in my mouth. I did not have long discussions over egg salad sandwiches about the meaning of life. My days were full, yet I remained, much of the time, unsatisfied. What happened to me? Coach, I said, suddenly remembering the nickname. Morrie beamed. That's me. I'm still your coach. He laughed and resumed his eating, a meal he had started 40 minutes earlier. I watched him now, his hands working gingerly as if he were learning to use them for the very first time. He could not press down hard with a knife. His fingers shook. Each bite was a struggle. He chewed the food finely before swallowing, and sometimes it slid out the sides of his lips so that he had to put down what he was holding to dab his face with a napkin. The skin from his wrist to his knuckles was dotted with age spots, and it was loose, like skin hanging from a chicken soup bone. For a while, we just ate like that, a sick old man, a healthy younger man, both absorbing the quiet of the room. I would say it was an embraced silence, but I seemed to be the only one, embarrassed silence, but I seemed to be the only one embarrassed. Dying, Morrie suddenly said, is the only one thing to be sad over, Mitch. Living unhappily is something else. So many of the people who come to visit me are unhappy. Why? Well, For one thing, the culture we have does not make people feel good about themselves. We're teaching the wrong things, and you have to be strong enough to say, if the culture doesn't work, don't buy it. Create your own. Most people can't do it. They're more unhappy than me, even in my current condition. I may be dying, but I am surrounded by loving, caring souls. How many people can say that? I was astonished by his complete lack of self-pity. Morrie, who could no longer dance, swim, bathe, or walk. Morrie, who could no longer answer his own door, dry himself after a shower, or even roll over in bed. How could he be so accepting? I watched him struggle with his fork, picking at a piece of tomato, missing it for the first 2 times. A pathetic scene, and yet I could not deny that sitting in his presence was almost magically serene. The same calm breeze that soothed me back in college. I shot a glance at my watch. Force of habit. It was getting late, and I thought about changing my plane reservation home. Then Morrie did something that haunts me to this day. "You know how I'm going to die," he said. I raised my eyebrows. "I'm going to suffocate. Yes, my lungs, because of my asthma, can't handle the disease. It's moving up my body, this ALS. It's already got my legs. Pretty soon it'll get my arms, my hands. And when it hits my lungs," he shrugged his shoulders, "I'm sunk." I had no idea what to say, so I said, "Well, you never know." Morrie closed his eyes. "I know, Mitch. You mustn't be afraid of my dying. I've had a good life, and we all know what's going to happen. I maybe have 4 or 5 months." "Come on," I said nervously. "Nobody can say." "I can. There's even a little test a doctor showed me." "A test?" "Inhale a few times." I did as he said. "Now, once more, but this time, when you exhale, count as many numbers as you can before you take another breath." I quickly exhaled the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and I reached 70 before my breath was gone. "Good," Morrie said. "You have healthy lungs. Now, watch what I do." He inhaled, then began his number count in a soft, wobbly voice. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. He stopped, gasping for air. When the doctors first asked me to do this, I could reach 23. Now it's 18. He closed his eyes, shook his head. "My tank is almost empty." I tapped my thighs nervously. That was enough for one afternoon. "Come back and see your old professor," Morrie said when I hugged him goodbye. I promised I would, and I tried not to think about the last time I promised this. In the campus bookstore, I shopped for the items on Morrie's reading list. I purchased books that I never knew existed, titles such as Youth, Identity and Crisis, I and Thou, The Divided Self. Before college, I did not know the study of human relations could be considered scholarly until I met Morrie. I did not believe it. But his passion for books is real and contagious. We begin to talk seriously sometimes after class when the room has emptied. He asks me questions about my life, then quotes lines from Martin Buber, Erik Erikson. Often he defers to their words, footnoting his own advice, even though he obviously thought the same things himself. It is at these times that I realize he is indeed a professor, not an uncle. One afternoon, I'm complaining about the confusion of my age, what is expected of me versus what I want for myself. "Have I told you about the tension of opposites?" he said. "The tension of opposites? Life is a series of pulls back and forth. You want to do one thing, but you are bound to do something else. Something hurts you, yet you know it shouldn't. You take certain things for granted, even when you should never take anything for granted. A tension of opposites, like a pull on a rubber band, and most of us live somewhere in the middle." "Sounds like a wrestling match," I say. "A wrestling match," he laughs. "Yes, you could describe life that way." "So which side wins?" I ask. "Which side wins?" He smiles at me, crinkled eyes, crooked teeth. "Love wins. Love always wins." So I will stop there before going into the next one. So, how did you like it?